All right. Hello, everybody. Please take a seat if you haven't found a seat yet. There's lots of spots all through up here as well as back there. Thank you so much for being here today for the Malcolm Renfrew Interdisciplinary Colloquium. And before I introduce today's speakers and say just a couple of words about what's happening today, I want to make sure you're aware of next week's colloquium, which is not in this spot. It's over at the Haddock Performance Hall at the Lionel Hampton School of Music because it's the Be Jazz Festival. And our annual presentation there is How to Listen to Jazz, featuring the Palouse Jazz Project. So I went last year. It's fantastic. You get to see how the improvisational how the improvisational process works. That is the heart of jazz. You get to ask questions. You get to hear some really amazing music. So please do join us for that. It's really wonderful and a completely different kind of event. And again, that's over at the Haddock Performance Hall in the Lionel Hampton School of Music on the other side of campus. But for today, it's my pleasure to introduce today's talk, which is titled Untrammeling Taylor, a panel discussion between archivers and archival subjects of the Taylor Wilderness Research Station Archive. And I have the pleasure of introducing Jack Kredell, who is a PhD candidate in environmental science at the University of Idaho's College of Natural Resources, and Devin Becker, who is our Associate Dean for Research and Instruction here at the University of Idaho Library, and is also co-director of the Center for Digital Inquiry and Learning. And Jack, I believe, is going to introduce our other two panelists, so please join me in welcoming them.
Thank you everyone for coming and welcome. We're really excited to have this conversation. And we're really excited. The kind of event here is to announce the Taylor Wilderness Research Station Archive, which is about 5 years in production. We've had a lot of work, a lot of people involved. And so I just want to get a few kind of thanks out of the way. So I wanted to thank College of Natural Resources and the library, especially the Deans Becker and Dean Hunter, for their support of this project. They provided funding for the interview project specifically. And I think the interviews really give this a sort of, a much more multidimensional facet than a typical digital archive or digital collection would have. I want to thank you to Andrew Weymouth, who's somewhere around here. You'll see some of Andrew's videos today. He did a bunch of visualizations and videos and metadata stuff here. I want to thank Kevin, always, who's our institutional memory and just generally great. And Mary Elizabeth, who did a lot of work at CDIL, kind of building this project. And then those at SPEC who did a lot of special collections and archives, who did a lot of quality control for this and asked a lot of difficult questions. And I appreciated that. And I wanted to say one more thing. Special thanks to former master student Hannah Wilson Creel, who actually took a lot of the materials in the archive from Taylor by plane out to McCall, drove them up here. We digitized them, and then she took them back. So a lot of that work was done by her. And she also wrote this incredible Taylor history, which you can get on the site, which is an extensive story map. And so with that, I'm hand it over to Jack to introduce the panel and the panelists.
Hello, thank you. Today we're joined by Grace Peven and Ed Krumpe. Ed is a recognized expert in wilderness management and natural resource planning. He served as a professor and department head in the Department of Conservation Social Sciences within CNR for 37 years. His work focuses on wilderness planning, public involvement in natural resource management, sustainable recreation practices, and monitoring human impacts in wildland recreation settings. He also served as a faculty coordinator and advisor for the Taylor Wilderness Research Station from its formative years in 1979 until 2020. Recently, he has served as chair of the board of directors of the Selway Bitterroot Frank Church Foundation. So thank you, Ed. Please welcome Ed. And we're also joined by my dear friend, Grace Peven. Grace is a PhD candidate in the Water Resources program at the University of Idaho. She has spent 3 seasons as a Taylor Wilderness Research Station researcher exploring groundwater from how groundwater flows affect springs and landscape resilience in areas of high severity wildfire, drought, and climate change. So thank you, Grace. So I'd like to begin today's session by acknowledging what environmental historian William Cronin called the trouble with wilderness in an essay of the same title. For Cronin, as I read him, American wilderness is the product of two displacements. The first was the displacement of Native Americans, which created the empirics, so the appearance of a landscape that was uninhabited, unworked, pristine. And the second displacement has to do with the production of a kind of space in law and as an imaginary from which we ourselves are excluded. And that's wilderness. And as Cronin writes, wilderness embodies a dualistic vision in which the human is entirely outside the natural. If we allow ourselves to believe that nature, to be true, must also be wild, then our very presence in nature represents its fall. The place where we are is the place where nature is not. To the extent that we celebrate wilderness as the measure with which we judge civilization, we reproduce the dualisms that set humanity and nature at opposite poles. We thereby leave ourselves little hope of discovering what an ethical, sustainable, honorable human place in nature might actually look like. And this dualism is apparent in the language of the Wilderness Act from 1964, where wilderness is defined as an area where the earth and its community of life are untrammeled by man, where man himself is a visitor who does not remain. And I chose to call this talk Untrammeling Taylor. Untrammeling is not a word. I made that up, but untrammeled is a very awkward word and a very uncommon word in English. And it means not deprived of freedom of action or expression, not restricted, not hampered. And this use of the negative prefix untrammeled, suggests that trammeled nature is the rule and wilderness is the exception or the antidote. And so to untrammel then for me is an effort to give unrestricted expression and intention to Taylor's human geography and presence. And my goal in adding the oral histories was to acknowledge and give archival form to the relationships and experiences that inform Taylor's sense of place. And the 11-hour-long oral histories that I added to the collection are not just a who's who of Taylor. They certainly do that. But I envision them as a tiny fraction of a 10,000-year human history associated with the place that we now call Taylor. And so we're going to show a video and then get into the discussion.
And I might add some audio here. So hold on. Let's see.
So, I mean, when I first saw it, I've got to tell you, my first surprise was this isn't a ranch. It's in a steep canyon river valley. But there's something special about that piece of landscape. I guess I call it a sense of place. When you step out of the plane, or even if you hike in and cross the bridge, and you look around, there's just it's like there's everything you need to survive there. You have a view to the north of the grass-covered benches. There's three levels of benches where the elk and bighorn sheep and deer come in the winter when there's snow everywhere else. They can still browse there. We've counted up to 64 at a time of elk, bighorn, and deer on those slopes. The stream is a primary tributary. There's salmon that run up it. There's lots of cutthroat and bull trout. And then there are two small streams. A very small stream, Pioneer Creek, comes right through the complex where some of the cabins are. And at the west end of the property is Rush Creek that crosses our property. And that's a fair-sized stream. And it's there's a lot of anadromous fish go up it. And so you have this combination of open spaces, forest to the south, that's north facing, and then two streams, plus the major creek. And it's wide open. You get you get the sun in the summer. It's just a special place. And you look at it and before long, you start hiking around and pretty soon you find signs that, someone else has been here. Like you go downstream less than a mile and there's these impressions in the ground, which people used to speculate. Was that where trees fell over and that was a root ball? Or was that miners scratching holes or something? Well, it was pit houses. We called them sheep eater Indians, but they're prior to that. Yeah, ancient houses that finally was excavated. So one of the archaeologists from the University of Idaho, Dr. Frank Leonhardt, he came in, had a grant from the National Geographic Society, and started to dig those. And those were dug into the ground, and then there would be dark colored circular holes along each side where they made like Quonset huts.
All right. So that was Ed, and that video was done by Andrew Weymouth with using Ed's interview with Jack. And so this first section is called Taylor as Place.
Yeah, so this first question is a very simple one, but an important one to me. And that's, what does it feel like to be at Taylor?
It's awkward because Taylor's developed. There are 4 or 5 cabins. We actually have internet access now. And so that's kind of incongruous. But you're looking into some truly wild country. And you get a sense of that as soon as you hike half a mile or a quarter mile, you're off the property. It's only 65 acres. But there you're just in the largest block of wilderness in the lower 48. And it's truly wild country. So you can't separate the two. You're at a developed place, and that meets some of our human needs and, ability to conduct research. But you're in a truly wild landscape where basically nature has run its course.
Yeah, similarly, I often feel like being at Taylor feels like you're looking out from a window to like this whole vast, infinite landscape. And it really feels infinite to me. I feel like that's the word that comes to mind. And I think a lot of that feeling of what Taylor is the journey to get there too, either hiking in or by plane or maybe kayaking in on the river. You absorb and observe this vast, massive landscape on your way in there. And then you tuck into this tiny little place in the grand scheme of things, that's Taylor. And it's on the north side, it's on the northern aspect. It gets really shady. It's very, very cozy. It's so steep there. The topography is so rugged and steep and rocky. And it's like these big rock walls surrounding you. And so I often feel like a little cabin fevery there because I'm like, there's just so much out there to explore that's really infinite. And yeah, humans have been there forever. And that's not, that's also a big part of that place too. It's like that community that you are now a part of, having been out there.
I have a follow-up. So how has this sense of remoteness changed over the years? I mean, I know that you can now get Instacart, right? Or I mean, you can order groceries and they arrive via plane. I'm sure this wasn't always the case.
I don't know. I think people very soon, once they get there, are willing to shed some of our, technology and stuff. If you order food and it comes on a plane, that's so you can spend more time in the field. I mean, it's not because I'm lazy or I love the food. I don't want to hike 30 miles out and drive 87 miles to McCall and back, just to resupply. So I think you put some of that behind you pretty quickly. And so it doesn't detract as much as you might think, because there's so much more to absorb your interest.
I can follow up to that a little bit. I've only been there for 3 years, so Ed has a much longer nuanced perspective on this than me. But the first season I was there, we had really bad Wi-Fi, and there's like one spot you could go to get a somewhat good connection. And I could have Zoom meetings and emails, and that was really convenient for me as a researcher because I'd come in, do my field work, and then look something up, like, oh, what was I seeing out there? What was that? Or like how should I like reshape my research questions to fit what I was seeing out there or observing, and then like going back to the literature to be able to read that. That's super convenient from a research perspective and an educational perspective too. But then the last 2 years, we've gotten Starlink out there, and that Wi-Fi, I mean, it's like being here, and there's no difference. So I feel like I have noticed, it's easier. It's just easier to get on your phone or your computer and be attached. So it's really has to be an intentional decision to remove yourself from that now. So I think it is very convenient. It does feel Taylor is very modern and comfortable.
My students never unsheathe the phone when we're out on trail learning something. They just knew that it would be in the river. What they do on the property, that's different. But
as the only one up here who's never been to Taylor, and who desperately wants to go, hint. I'm just sort of fascinated by, hearing stories of people's first times in, and then also I'm really interested, like, Ed, you've been going there for however many, many years. Like, how is it? What's that first experience like? Like, what and how does that change as you return? And as you return, does it build, or is it always sort of like a new experience every time you get there? You leave civilization and enter the wilderness like that.
I think it takes maybe 2 days to get reabsorbed. But as far as first-time visitors, I've seen this 100 times. A plane comes in, a Cessna 206, and 3 or 4 people come out. And, they're looking for their gear, and it gets unloaded, and we say, throw it in that. We have cabin tents for students and stuff. And then we get in, we start walking around, and they get silent. And just a year or so ago, we brought in some people that are connected with foundations. And so they were, they were accomplished professional people. The same thing happened with them. They weren't students, and they weren't there to do research. But within, a matter of minutes, they're just walking, they're looking around, and they're silent. And I don't know if they're absorbing it or it's absorbing them, but I've seen that literally since 1979. That hasn't changed.
Yeah, I love that question. First time I went in there was mid-April, and so the snow was still melting. The creeks were running really big, and I was trying to do a little recon mission of like, okay, what springs can I go study which are accessible? I have some previously mapped springs from previous researchers. What can I want to go check it out. So I had this mission to just go hike and explore as much as I possibly could to identify research sites for my research. And so I got to see a lot my first time there, which was really fun. And it was just amazing how you can be at the bottom of the canyon at Taylor and then hike straight up, 3,000, 4,000 feet and then hit snow line. So it was really cool to see. Feel like I was in this kind of transitional period when I was there, the changing of seasons. And I would say each time it's really different for me when I come back. And for the past 3 seasons, I've been in once a month about in the summer, spring to fall. And so I see like not only the changing of seasons where I'd come in for a week and then it'd be a month and then I'd come in again, and you could see that change, like removing yourself for a while and then coming back in. You see subtle changes that maybe you wouldn't pick up if you were there all the time. So they're just more obvious. And I also think that's what makes Taylor amazing. It's such a dynamic place because it's not developed and controlled in a modern human sense. So it does, like, disturbance is everything out there. Everything is constantly being disturbed and let like that whole disturbance cycle running through. And so it's so dynamic and it's constantly changing. And also there is a really high severity wildfire in 2000 that you can, I mean, it's still so obvious like how severe it was. A lot of downed trees and burnt logs. And you can see like this used to be a forested place. This used to be, you know, maybe a shady watershed or whatever. And so I think like that landscape is not, it's not ever permanent. It's always changing and so dynamic. And so I think part of like the cabin fever I feel too is like, I got to go see it before it changes so much again.
I know Ed in his interview talked about how you used to be able to hike out of there and you never left shade. And now when you hike out, you're basically in sun for
7 miles to Cabin Creek. It was almost all dug fir forest. And your legs would be wet because of along the trail, there's grass and stuff. And you always start hiking in the morning. And now it's about 90% wide open. I mean, there's still big old snags, burnt, charred snags and stuff, and trees falling down and stuff. But it's in the sun the whole way. So that's just totally different.
One other thing you said in your interview that I was really struck by was how, in terms of Taylor as a place, how it sticks with everyone that goes there, how it sticks with the students, especially. Like they'll come in for a semester and 30 years later, they're still making life choices because of that choice. So I wondered if, you know, you could expand upon that.
Well, see, there's a secret about Taylor that I don't tell the students. And that is, we're going to take you in there. They're never going to come all the way out. You just don't. And I'll give you a real quick example. Interns that had been in there in the summer came down by my office in the basement of what was forestry, and they said, we're going to get a bite for lunch. You want to come? I said, sure. So we're walking up 6th Street on the sidewalk, having a perfect conversation about Gambinos or the Moscow Mule or somewhere else they were considered dating myself. And I looked, and we were walking single file. So after the whole summer, you just conversation was going back and forth. But wait, and I thought, well, no. And then a little later, we went up. We were past, I don't know, past where Gambino was, and somebody said, "Yeah, Cessna." And the person behind me said, "It's a 206, but it's not turbocharged." Now, probably none of you have ever noticed whether a Cessna flew over you walking on the streets of Moscow. But planes are important there. In the fall, they're bringing outfitters, and that has some concerns. Other times, they're bringing researchers, or you're waiting for equipment or something. And you know, these planes are just part of it. We have a landing strip that just Taylor used mules to build. And so that's just one example. But then, like you said, I have met people. I was in Stanley, and a tall, good-looking guy walked up to me and started talking to me, and kind of vaguely familiar. About 25 years ago, he'd been in at Taylor, and he said it had influenced his whole college career and his job. He worked for Idaho Fish and Game because of that, and that's not what he started in. So, yeah, it kind of sticks with you. You never come all the way out.
You also can't have a bear roast with golden currant sauce at Gambino's. Should we play a video? Grace and I dined on that once at Taylor. A bear roast with golden currant sauce that we made from the currants on the airstrip.
As you can see, we have many things available from the homepage that you can go and click on. This is similar to what we just saw, but a little different, and we did that on purpose. But this is kind of the trailer to Jack's interviews.
Salmon up it. Before long, you start hiking around, and pretty soon you find signs that, someone else has been here.
Stepping outside the cabin there, Taylor, what do you feel? You feel that you are a small entity in a big environment.
Ecology is the science of home. Like that's actually what the word originally means, right? And so I think of places like this as particularly meaningful context for doing ecological research, because come to think about of it as a home place. So the science we do here and the culture, the community of people that it interacts here is rich and deep, and it extends back before my having even visited this place.
As males mature, it seems the ears migrate down more on the sides of the head.
Your ears have migrated down, Morris.
And so we have more from Morrison on the next video, which we'll end with. But for now, the next section is called Taylor as Ecotone, which Jack can talk a little bit about. But I mean, we've been talking a lot about Taylor as wilderness and within wilderness and against wilderness. But like, what's the kind of working culture of Taylor? You talked about the mules. You're always bringing stuff in. There's a lot of kind of like, you have to do a lot of work when you're there just to make the place go. So I wondered if you both could speak a little bit to that.
What have you had?
So kind of like what happens on a daily basis? What's the flow
Yeah,
of life at Taylor?
Taylor as a working environment or
Mhm.
landscape.
Yeah. I mean, I've only been there for 3 years, so I think that's really, but my understanding is that that's very driven by the caretaker at the time. I think they really guide what Taylor looks like on a daily basis. And Andrew, the current caretaker, he has mules and a horse out there, and it's a pasture for them. They're also there like helping students get to places too. It's also like, the airstrip needs to be cut, mowed, maintained, watered, thinking about fire risk on a daily, especially in the summer when it's really dry and hot, thinking about keeping the grass watered. And I mean, there's a lot of like chopping firewood, cooking, there's this communal cookhouse. And so I think that's a really cool community space where whoever's out there at the time, we're cooking meals together, collaborating, cleaning up together. For me, I'm gone most of the day hiking. So that's my workflow of like, there's people in and out of the research station, off on their adventures, hiking, doing research. Also people there working on structures, cleaning out pack rat, poop, things, things like that.
Yeah, I mean, the university supports it. They stand behind it, like way behind sometimes, in that, we never have much paid staff. We have a manager, and then sometimes we'll have a part-time extra maintenance person and stuff, because there's just a lot of work to do in the summer. But if the interns and students didn't pitch in, and when we put the researchers to work too, the place would probably fall apart. There's just a lot to do. But we've always emphasized primitive skills. So we heat with firewood in the cabins and in the cabin tents. And I get out the crosscut saws and I tell students, you're going to buck up this log that's blown down with a crosscut. And the guys are often excited, and the young ladies will say, I don't think I can do that. Well, by the end of the day, once you show someone how you use a crosscut, you never push it. You only pull it. And the next person pulls it back. You only pull it. The young ladies are so much better at cross-cutting the first day than the men are. And then it takes them begrudgingly because they get excited and they start pushing in the saw buckles. And about the second or third day of cutting firewood, everyone's pretty equal. There'll be guys and gals together on either end, and everyone's pulling the saw and they're doing right. And then later, big tree across the trail, we might hike down with a saw 3 miles and cut it out, help out the Forest Service. So we've emphasized primitive skills, and there's been stock in there since Dave Lewis. I mean, clear back in the 1920s and stuff. There's always been stock, and so that's we fly in a little bit of supplemental feed just for vitamins and stuff, but you rely on the hay, and with a mule team and a wagon, and we had 6 stock, we would put up 14 tons of hay every summer, and we do it in just a few days. It's just an amazing process to see. We have a 1947 or 46 sickle bar mower, an old McCormick sickle bar mower that the mules pull. And we cut it. We have an old dump rake that's those rakes with the big tines on the back, and it drives along and makes the hay in rows. Late that afternoon, you go and you flip it so there's little piles of hay, and that helps it to dry. The next day, the mules just wander like this with this big wagon and person on each side of the pile, just flipping up and on. And you always have a teamster, a person driving the team, and you'll have 2 or 3 stompers. And that's as the hay gets thrown on, they walk in circles to kind of pack it and get a little more packed in the middle. So you can get you can get a couple tons of hay on a wagon pulled by these mules. And turn around, and then you unload it, and we build a pole barn so it would last for the winter. But that will last all winter for 6 or 7 stock. And that's a real learning experience. And the same with packing. They learn how to, put on a Decker pack saddle and how to balance the load. You can only have about 150 pounds on each side, and you have a circus or something. If you don't get it balanced and down the trail, you'll regret it. So we've always focused on primitive skills because we don't know where else they get it. The Forest Service would call me and say, Ed, do you have any students that could work for us this summer? And I said, well, what are you looking for? And he said, well, it's trail work. And he said, if they'd have any stock experience. And I'm thinking, well, a little. I said, how much? And they said, well, we'd like them to know which end the hay goes in. And I'd say, well, how about ones that have put up hay, that have packed, that have ridden, and have even done some hoof trimming. And they'd be hired like that with a phone. So it's been a good experience that way.
Grace, I have a question for your workflow since I got to experience that firsthand. And so field research, especially physical science, requires minimizing one's presence on the landscape to do science, or to avoid impacting your study site. And for you, because of the remoteness and the small footprint of your springs, you're forced to become part of their environment. And the springs you study also provide you with the water that you drink throughout the day, and the water that we drank throughout the day that one time I did the circuit with you. And so can you talk more about that intimate relationship that you have with your sites?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, it's really tough to do research out around Big Creek. I've learned a lot about how not to study springs and how to study springs.
And not to wear Crocs.
And not to wear Crocs. Although Jack did do the circuit in Crocs. So that's, yeah. So I've experimented with different methods, and that's part of like why I think Taylor is such an awesome place to do science and learn so much about how to do science, because you just try things out and things don't work. And then maybe you get it right at some point, or maybe you don't and you learn a lot. But I've experimented with, I hiked to a spring. I mean, I'm also, I'm careful not to, I want to make my presence known when I come up to a spring, because I don't want a bear to get spooked and, come at me. But, I try like, hey, I'm coming in. And it is kind of like you're entering like another world when you go to a spring, because it's a really dry, arid landscape, and it's rocky, not a whole lot of vegetation, especially after the fire in 2000. So you are kind of like, I feel like I am entering like another world when I get to my spring, because it's usually like even a small seepy amount of water, increased soil moisture, the vegetation just latch onto it, and they're able to create these little like green jungles on this otherwise really dry landscape. So yeah, I try to like kind of respectfully come up to the spring, and I try not to like step on plants as much as possible. I mean, you are making an impact being there. But I try to see it as like I'm just visiting and like trying to observe it. And I've also left equipment at springs to try to measure water level and tree growth, and put trail cameras up there to try to see what's going on when I'm not there. And that's like usually not well received by the wildlife. And I've had so many bears destroy my equipment, and that's, that's to be expected, but they're just really curious. And yeah, it's difficult to do research there.
No, Jack showed me some of your trail cam pictures on your website, and they were really fascinating. Some scary, some a little frightening as well. With some of the big cats,
Yeah.
which we'll talk about too. One thing I wanted to ask Jack a question actually too. Jack did these 11 interviews with important people in the history of Taylor, and one of the things he told me was that he was trying to kind of reinscribe the human in a place defined by its displacement, which I wrote down because I thought it was a good quote. And so I wondered if you could talk a little bit about your experience doing all these interviews, what you took away from that, and what you're hoping to kind of produce as part of that for this site.
I don't know what I'm trying to produce. I just hope that it persists in some form, and that someone else takes up the work of archiving. Yeah. During the summer that I had the fellowship, gas prices were pretty high, so all of that money went to driving around Idaho and seeking out these people. Fortunately, Ed was a local and pretty easy to get in touch with, but other subjects like Morris are more cantankerous and harder to find. And Morris is in Sun Valley, Idaho, which is quite a drive from here. And I timed that with the salmon running up the South Fork so that I could fish on my way there. And I eventually got to Morris's house, and I had read a lot of his work from the 70s, and I kind of used it to signal to him that I spoke his language and he didn't have to explain anything to me, in order so that we could move beyond a conversation about science to get to what really motivated him. And there turned out to be a lot there, as I think we'll see. And so I'm just interested in approaching the human through the science and trying to get that on film for archival purposes, because there's no room for that sort of thing in a scientific article,
Yeah, I've been struck by watching those, just on how many, and we'll watch one of them, but how many human moments there are, just how many stories that people start telling, and how moving to hear those stories it is, and especially so many of them being set in such a unique and special place. But I mean, it kind of brings us back to, what is an archive of science? What is an archive of wilderness? And and how do we produce those. And so an archive, you know, like this one, has a lot of memos and emails and letters and things that, you know, typically you're not going to be reading or interested on a daily basis. But as you start to get into those and start to look at them more closely, they really do tell a story. And so I was wondering, especially for you, Ed, like, you know, you've seen a lot of, you know, you talked a little bit about how the university supports this place, and it's always been kind of a struggle, it looks like, from reading these, from the histories you can draw from these emails and memos and things. And so I wondered what you might reflect on in terms of Taylor as an entity, and Taylor as a place that is supported by a university, you know, many miles away, with administrators many miles away, and kind of talk to those interstitial sort of issues.
Well, I mean, everybody's heard it takes a village to raise a student. It takes a university and a village to have a wilderness research station like this. And so the Board of Regents is who owns it. 1969, they got it for a steal, 100,000. It'd be worth a gazillion now. But nobody really put up firm operating budgets. So the physical plant had a budget strictly to be spent on maintenance type things. And so any researcher that came in, we'd cajole them to include a little to help, you know, could you help support one of our interns or whatever. We've had some wonderful benefactors. Janet Pope isn't here, but you know, she just supported us to the tune of hundreds of thousands of dollars and a lot of work and support and stuff. So it's been a constant struggle, but people appreciate it. It's not that anybody at the university really was against Taylor. They just there just wasn't a mechanism to really understand who's in charge or what's going on. You know, and we've had, well, I survived, I think, 8 or 9 university presidents in my tenure, and none of them were against it, and several were very supportive, and Dr. Green, of course, has been supportive. So that's important, but it takes a lot of effort, and I devoted a fair amount of my career to that. I mean, some summers I didn't do research because there was a lot going on that had to be done, but no one was doing that. So I adopted the mantle of faculty coordinator. That's not real. I never got a penny for that. But well, somebody needed to do it, and it was such a great place, and people worked so hard in there. The managers, Jim and Holly, and Pete and Meg Gagg, and some of those managers and stuff. So I felt what I could do would be the liaison with the university and like contacts for them, or find out what their needs were, and things like that. But it's not like a regular. It's not like an ag experiment station, like in Nampa or something. It doesn't have that kind of structure. So it's kind of seat of the pants. Like I said, it takes a university and the community to keep it going.
We're short on time. We want to get to questions, and maybe in the questions we can ask that question. So we want to show one more video, and then we'll open it up. And here we go.
There's one incident with the dogs and with Wilbur that is fresh in my mind that will never go away. See, we tracked the cat out of Rush Creek,
And Wilbur was a little reluctant to turn loose on it because he couldn't judge how old it was. And Rush Creek is really. But we turned loose up there by under the tower, and it went down to the mouth of Rush Creek, crossed Big Creek, went 3/4 of the way up Horse Mountain, angled around into Cliff Creek and over, and we found one of the dogs after dark over on the ridge into Goat Creek. So we went, dropped off into Taylor Ranch for the night, got up early and went back up on the ridge the next morning and found the other two dogs that had treed a cougar, but were off on a cliff, and I had to go off of the cliff with a rope to get the dogs off that cliff. But we marked that cougar, and but Little Red was gone, his favorite, and we tracked him off into Goat Creek and up onto Dunce Creek Ridge. Still no red. And dark. We got back to Taylor, and Wilbur figured he was gone. So we spent all the next day tracking that country, and didn't find his track. Wilbur said either the cougars killed him or he's run off a cliff. But we got up the next morning, and he said, well, let's go down and make one more look. In the early years, the first year, Wilbur established a camp at the mouth of Dunce Creek, and just a sleepover camp, because we didn't have facilities at Taylor that first winter, but we did at Cabin Creek. But anyway, we went down and no tracks on the trail, nothing, and we approached that old campsite, and here comes Red, bounding out of the creek bottom, barking his head off at us. You know, he didn't recognize him.
All right. So thank you very much for being here. We're going to open it up to questions. Do you have anything else to say? Yeah.
Questions? I'm happy to come to anybody. Ah, lovely.
I wonder if part of the archive includes experiences that undergraduates in the Semester in the Wild program have had.
Yeah, there are several pieces in the kind of the browse, the artifacts and research part there that are kind of first person descriptions of that. There's a lot of thank you letters actually in there that are sent to Janet Pope and to others, and there are some really great thank you letters back to the managers and as you know, or the caretakers for allowing visits and all the education that happened there too. So not like a ton of that, but some. And then there's some in the if you hit the about section, there's a history there, and Hannah goes over some of the student experience there too.
I have interviewed one Semester in the Wild student teacher, but that interview is not up yet. I would also like to interview last year's teacher, who's sitting right there, Garrick Robinson. And I would also like to get oral histories with former students. It's just a time thing. But yes, hopefully.
Okay, sorry. I am so fascinated in how you all talk about the place and calling it like a person, right? Even having the name Taylor, and not saying it, the whole name hasn't been said once, which I think is fascinating, right? You just talk about it like a humanoid thing. But I'm wondering, like, especially overlaying the indigenous history of like, why is it called Taylor? Who made that decision? Who's Taylor? Has there been talks about renaming the place at all, or especially given like the deep archaeological history with the the surrounding tribes. Yeah.
It's not the Gulf of Mexico. We're not renaming it. So Dave Lewis was a guide for General Custer and helped bring in ammunition and stuff in the Indian War when they tried to displace the sheep eater Indians. And as a guide, he saw this place and he saw that whole drainage. He came back when he got out of the Army and picked that spot, because there's a number of places that he picked that as the best. And then he was getting old. He was in his 90s when, and he operated it as a big game hunting camp. And Jess Taylor from Boise was an outfitter, and he got to know them. And so Jess and Dorothy bought the place and moved in, and they managed it for quite a few years. I don't know, a dozen or 13 years or something like that. And then they were getting a little bit older, and they decided they were so impressed with Morris's work and the students that came in. That's really what made the difference. They knew it was great for hunting, and they used to catch strings of salmon, but they said this is better than outfitting. And so that's when they decided to sell, that they were willing to sell to the university. So it was just Taylor, and it was always called Taylor Ranch. And so for years, the university called it Taylor Ranch. But then we had a wilderness research center that was on campus for 8 or 9 years. And so we started calling it the Taylor Wilderness Research Center. But then powers that be said a center is something else. There's all kinds of criteria. But it's a field station. It's the most remote field station in the lower 48. There's no other field research station that accommodates researchers and students in the whole United States that is within the boundaries of a wilderness, and that includes national parks. So we call it Taylor because it was Taylor Ranch for 70 some years. But we kind of think that it's more than Taylor Ranch, it's Taylor Wilderness Research Station. And so that's why we refer to it as Taylor.
Just really quick, thanks for that question, Nick. Because I think I can't speak to the administrative conversations about the name and like the recognition of like the sheep eater people and like the indigenous history and like present connection to place. But I can say I think that's lacking at Taylor, and there's not a lot of recognition. There was like one poster in the cookhouse about the sheep eater people that was from like an indigenous studies class from ISU that had come in, and they had built this poster, and it was super interesting about the sheep eater history, and it was like behind a shelf or something in the cookhouse, and I like moved it into the lab to like so people come in and like read more about the history. But they made a really good point that this is on Forest Service land, but there's this place called Soldier Bar just down from Taylor that has a memorial to a couple like U.S. Soldiers that had died in the sheep eater campaign that I think is in like the late 1800s.
Only one.
Oh, one. Okay. And there's a memorial there, and they made the point in that poster, just like, what about all the sheep eater people? Why isn't there no memorial there? So, yeah, thanks for that question.
So I'm familiar with some of the literature that's come out of the Taylor Ranch, some of the research literature. What I'm curious about is there a research agenda that's set, or do you just wait for people to show up with ideas and the background funding that they need to get their work done? Is it just sitting there waiting for people to arrive, and I know there is some of that, but is there a general research set of priorities, set up, adopted, or is there direction to what's going on there?
Unfortunately not, because like I said, it's a university-owned thing. College of Forestry inherited it and spent a lot of their own money to help support it. And we had an advisory council for a while, that set some priorities, but they actually were larger ones about research that, doesn't impact natural processes and stuff. But they never got down to say just what it is. So that's a disadvantage. The advantage is that I think if we had a research agenda, I don't think ephemeral springs would ever have made it to the top. I'm sorry, it wouldn't. But they're fascinating. They play a key role. We're learning more about that than almost any other place. So some of this serendipitous discovery has brought in different aspects that that perhaps if you had some strict agenda, you might overlook. But it's been a frustration. I mean, it's been largely getting people together and on campus to try to support it as a facility, and so there wasn't a research agenda like that.
This is just wonderful. I'm glad you've done this. Can we go ahead and do it for 2 or 3 hours? What I want one of you to do, at least, is to describe your first walk into Taylor, whatever. Describe how that feels. I've not been there. We were, somehow we didn't make it. Jim Peak was gonna get us there and it didn't happen. But I think of the airplane, the Cessna, in the same regard to Taylor Ranch as I think of jet boats to the main salmon. We're in the wilderness, and then all of a sudden this jet boat races by at 40 miles an hour. Talk about that walk into Taylor Ranch.
Yeah, like the hike to get in there. I actually haven't hiked all the way in there, but I've floated on my inflatable kayak into Taylor. Which was really fun, and also like such a unique way to like commute to my workstation.
From the main, you mean
Big Creek.
main salmon?
No, from the trailhead where you would hike in
Big-
Edwardsburg.
Big Creek Ranger Station it's outside of Yellow Pine.
Mhm. Yeah, so that's where
We
you would
filmed
hike
it.
in.
We did film it, but it's not on the site yet. So
Yeah, I don't know. We had one of those cameras that was like a 360 view. I don't know how that turned. Okay, yeah. But it was, yeah, such a cool perspective, I think, especially because I'm a hydrologist. I just think about water and how like water connects everything. And so cool to start from the headwaters of Big Creek and then like journey to Taylor, which is 7 miles from the confluence of the Middle Fork of the Salmon. And so almost going that whole creek distance was a really cool way to like connect everything for me.
But I think that it's the vastness. Even though you land there in a powerful plane, you get out, the motor shuts off. It's the silence, and you hear birds and stuff. That you're just absorbed in that. And like I said, as soon as you cross there's a trail bridge, and you're on wilderness land. It's so big. I mean, picture the Lewiston Valley without a single structure. I mean, it's huge, and there's mountains that rise, and actually there's 3 streams on the Taylor property. We didn't mention, but there's Cliff Creek that comes from the other side. So that's I think the impression a lot of people get is how big the area is, how expansive, and how remote, and so yeah, the planes, and I don't like them. I like going in the winter when they're not flying. So it's so much more quiet. But we're talking 3,600 square miles, 2,000, almost 2.4 million acres. That's 3,600 square miles, surrounded by almost an equal amount of roadless land. And then right across the Salmon River is the Selway Bitterroot, 1.2 million. So you're in the heart of almost 6 million acres. That's almost 8,000 square miles. That's doesn't have permanent structures or factories or, you know, irrigation or anything. So that's overpowering. That's overpowering.
Wait, time for one more question. I can ask a question. I was wondering, I really like, Jack, how you started off by talking about sort of how the idea of untrammeledness is constructed and who creates wilderness. And so I'm really curious if any of you have thoughts about wilderness and privilege, and maybe more specifically, if you have, for example, if when Black or Indigenous students have come to that space, if you feel like they have a different experience of wilderness. I mean, I know I'm a backpacker myself, and when I'm in the wilderness, I feel like I stick out a little bit. So I'm wondering about that experience of that silence, that grandness, that hugeness, and who gets to access that. So I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts about that.
Well, I mean, we have had students of color. We've had older students and younger students, and students from all parts of the country. So students from back east are really amazed. And we've often tried to have a mix so that we had some are really experienced. They've backpacked, they've hunted, they've fished, they knew which end of a crosscut to pull, all that. And we welcome them. I mean, they're helpful, they're good, and they have time to do good work. But we also try to recruit some that have never stepped foot outside of the city. And that's transformative. And we've had gay, we've had transition students even. So there's been a fair diversity. Obviously, this is Idaho. It's largely white, but we've welcomed students of, you know, of diversity is welcome. Yeah, I know. They can't fire me. That's a good. That's a good question.
Yeah, I would also add to that. I think there's often this talk about like preserving old Idaho out at Taylor and just like working from the land and like, you know, kind of maybe being a cowboy out there. And like, that's to me feels like very masculine space and white space. What does old Idaho represent? What does that mean? And should we be thinking about it in that way? Because that's
how old.
Yeah. Yeah.
But we've had artists and writers in residence, and that's they've really appreciated that.
Yeah, I think it takes maybe some of those like structured programs, maybe that more of that to like, yeah, create more of that access and like inclusion.
I'd like to encourage people. This website's amazing. I mean, they didn't have that when I was messing around with this. Yeah, it is. But you need to go on. I don't know if there's a simple way for them to find it, but once you get into it, there's all kinds of things. And that mapping stuff. I mean, I could never quite describe what the benches were or what is the steepness and those different trails that if you read Morris Hohenhofer's book, Cougars on the Cliff and stuff. But seeing that's amazing to put that visualization. I mean, the sweat and blisters that it takes to move around in that land. It's just big, rough country. And that's an amazing addition to it besides the interviews. And we have had written transcriptions, even Jess Taylor and Dorothy. There's a transcription that's been typed up. But seeing these, I'd encourage you. There's a lot. There's quite a few videos and a lot of resource information. And just click around. It's every bit as interesting as TikTok or Facebook. It really is.
Well, that seems like the perfect note to end on. So please join me in thanking our panel. This was amazing. All right, I'm sure if you have questions, you can maybe come up and have a couple minutes with them now. And also just to quickly remind you that next week at the Lionel Hampton School of Music is How to Listen to Jazz. So please join us at 12:30 over there. Thank you all so much for attending.